Welcome to episode 2 of Adams Letters and Language, a revolutionary elocutionary podcast. I'm Sarah Walsh, a school librarian by vocation and historical interpreter by accident. I've been studying and portraying Abigail Adams for about 9 years, building as accurate an impression as I could by hand sewing 18th century garments. During COVID lockdown, I came across Christopher Davis's Instagram account where he was discussing historical speech and reading various documents using an 18th century dialect. I realized that in addition to the proper undergarments, clothing, shoes, and hairstyles, all of the external attributes of a historical portrayal, I could go deeper with my impression and get even closer to really embodying Abigail by learning how to speak the way she would have. This is where you come in, Christopher.
Hello and welcome. I'm Christopher Davis. I'm a dialect coach/designer, and I got involved in living history at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum. It was there that guests would ask me, "Is that what they sounded like?" I realized I was doing something with my voice that triggered their ear into assuming I was doing something possibly authentic, even if it was completely unintentional on my part. That got me to thinking, though, about the choices we make, whether intentional or unintentional, when we give voice to the past. After falling through many rabbit holes, I now find myself 10 years later specializing in coaching historical performers on speech and accent. My goal is to challenge audience expectations of what the past sounded like, and to strive for more authentic representations of the spoken word in historical contexts.
We are very excited to be recording this second episode together in the same place. Christopher lives in Western Massachusetts and I live in Maryland, so we've always met over Zoom for our dialect work, and that was also how we recorded the first episode of the podcast. We both traveled to Boston for history camp this past weekend, so this was the perfect opportunity to record episode 2 in the same room. But we're not just in any room. Kathy Backus-Torrey serves on the board of the Abigail Adams Historical Society in Weymouth, which maintains the property now known as the Abigail Adams Birthplace. And Kathy has graciously granted us access to the birthplace today, so we are literally inside the house where John and Abigail first met and carried out their courtship, where Abigail wrote her earliest letters to John during their engagement, and where they were married. Are you getting goosebumps yet?
Definitely getting goosebumps. For this episode, we want to focus on a particularly hilariously frustrating exchange that took place between John and Abigail over a canister of tea.
The caprices and vagaries of the Postal Service were numerous, particularly when letters were traveling between two colonies, in this case Pennsylvania and Massachusetts Bay. Even after the Resolution on Independence was adopted, there was a lot to be done before the states were truly united, and each colony still operated as an individual entity.
John and Abigail both wrote to each other as frequently as they could, but there was no such thing as time sensitive, because you truly could not predict how long a letter would actually take to arrive. In the case of this one canister of tea, it seems plausible that John and Abigail's letters literally passed each other on the road.
Boston, July 13, 1776. I must begin with apologizing to you for not writing since the 17th of June. I have really had so many cares upon my hands and mind, with a bad inflammation in my eyes, that I have not been able to write. I now date from Boston, where I yesterday arrived and was with all 4 of our little ones inoculated for the smallpox. My uncle and aunt were so kind as to send me an invitation with my family. Mr. Cranch and wife and family, my sister Betsy and her little niece, Cotton Tufts and Mr. Thaxter, a maid who has had the distemper, and my old nurse compose our family. A boy, too, I should have added, 17 in all. My uncle's maid with his little daughter and a negro man are here. We had our bedding, etc. to bring, a cow we have driven down from Braintree, and some hay I have had put in the stable, wood, etc., and we have really commenced housekeepers here. The house was furnished with almost every article except beds. Sunday, July 14. By yesterday's post I received 2 letters dated 3rd and 4th of July, and though your letters never fail to give me pleasure, be the subject what it will, yet it was greatly heightened by the prospect of the future happiness and glory of our country. Nor am I a little gratified when I reflect that a person so nearly connected with me has had the honor of being a principal actor in laying a foundation for its future greatness. May the foundation of our new Constitution be justice, truth, and righteousness. Like the wise man's house, may it be founded upon those rocks, and then neither storms nor tempests will overthrow it. I cannot but feel sorry that some of the most manly sentiments in the Declaration are expunged from the printed copy. Perhaps wise reasons induced it. Poor Canada, I lament Canada, but we ought to be in some measure sufferers for the past folly of our conduct. The fatal effects of the smallpox there has led almost every person to consent to hospitals in every town. Where the blame lies in that respect, I know not. 'Tis laid upon Congress, and Congress is also blamed for not appointing us a general. But Rome was not built in a day. I hope the multiplicity of cares and avocations which envelop you will not be too powerful for you. I have many anxieties upon that account. Nabby and Johnny send duty and desire Mamma to say that an inflammation in their eyes, which has been as much of a distemper as the smallpox, has prevented their writing, but they hope soon to be able to acquaint Papa of their happy recovery from the distemper. Mr. Cranch and wife, Sister Betsy, and all our friends desire to be remembered to you, and foremost in that number stands your Portia. Postscript. A little India herb would have been mighty agreeable now. Monday, August 18, 1776. I sat down to write you a few lines by the post, because I would not omit one opportunity. I received yours of August 6, but cannot tell what to do for you, confined as I am here. I shall know what you would have me do by Mr. A when he returns. At present, all my attention is taken up with the care of our little Charles, who has been very bad. The symptoms rose to a burning fever, a stupefaction and delirium ensued for 48 hours. The doctor attended him as though he had been his own child. He has the distemper in the natural way. A most plentiful eruption has taken place. Though everything has been done to lessen it that could, his face will be quite covered. Many, if not all, will run together. He is yet a very ill child, though his symptoms are lessened. I would not have alarmed you. I hope he is not dangerous, but we cannot tell the event. Heaven grant it may be favorable. I will write you by Wednesday post. I shall see then how he is like to be, and can form a better judgment of him. Nabby is cleverly. They are turning fast upon her, and she can walk today with borrowing my shoes and stockings. Adieu, the post will leave me. Don't forget my herbs for your own sake as well as mine. Ever yours.
Philadelphia, August 28, 1776. Mr. Benjamin Smith of South Carolina was kind enough to send forward from New York your favor of August 14, and it came safely to hand today. There is nothing in it about your herbs, which in your letter of the 18th instant you wish me to remember. I am yet at a loss for your meaning. Mr. Gary carried a canister of India herb for you, which I hope you received. Pray let me know whether you have or not. Yours of the 18th has fixed an error in my heart, which will not be drawn out until the next poster. Philadelphia, September 5th, 1776. Mr. Bass arrived this day with the joyful news that you were all well. By this opportunity I shall send you a canister of green tea by Mr. Hare. Before Mr. Gary went away from hence, I asked Mrs. Yard to send a pound of green tea to you. She readily agreed. When I came home at night, I was told Mr. Gary was gone. I asked Mrs. Y if she had sent the canister. She said yes, that Mr. Gary undertook to deliver it with a great deal of pleasure. From that time I flattered myself you would have the poor relief of a dish of good tea, under all your fatigues with the children, and under all the disagreeable circumstances attending the smallpox. And I never conceived a single doubt that you had received it until Mr. Gary's return. I asked him, accidentally, whether he delivered it, and he said yes, to Mr. Samuel Adams' lady. I was astonished. He misunderstood Mrs. Yard entirely, for upon inquiry she affirms she told him it was for Mrs. John Adams. I was so vexed at this that I have ordered another canister, and Mr. Hare has been kind enough to undertake to deliver it. How the dispute will be settled I don't know. You must send a card to Mrs. Samuel Adams and let her know that the canister was intended for you, and she may send it you if she chooses, as it was charged to me. It is amazingly dear, nothing less than 40 shillings, lawful money a pound. I am rejoiced that my horses are come. I shall now be able to take a ride. But if it is...
Braintree, September 7, 17 and 76. A people fired like the Romans with love of their country and of liberty, a zeal for the public good, and a noble emulation of glory will not be disheartened or dispirited by a succession of unfortunate events. But like them may we learn by defeat the power of becoming invincible. I hope to hear from you by every post till you return. The herbs you mention I never received. I was upon a visit to Mrs. Samuel Adams about a week after Mr. Gary returned, when she entertained me with a very fine dish of green tea. The scarcity of the article made me ask her where she got it. She replied, her sweetheart sent it to her by Mr. Gary. I said nothing, but thought my sweetheart might have been equally kind considering the disease I was visited with, when that tea was recommended as a bracer. A little after you mentioned a couple of bundles sent. I supposed one of them might contain the article, but found they were letters. How Mr. Gary should make such a mistake, I know not. I shall take the liberty of sending for what is left of it, though I suppose it is half gone, as it was very freely used. If you had mentioned a single word of it in your letter, I should have immediately found out the mistake. 'Tis said that the efforts of our enemies will be to stop the communication between the colonies by taking possession of Hudson's Bay. Braintree, September 20, 1776. I sit down this evening to write you, but I hardly know what to think about your going to New York. The story has been told so many times, and with circumstances so particular, that I with others have given some heed to it, though my not hearing anything of it from you leaves me at a loss. Yours of September 4 came to hand last night. Our worthy uncle is a constant attendant upon the post office for me, and brought it me. Yours of September 5 came tonight to Braintree, and was left as directed with the canister. Am sorry you gave yourself so much trouble about them. I got about half you sent me by Mr. Gary, am much obliged to you, and hope to have the pleasure of making the greater part of it for you. Your letter damped my spirits. When I had no expectation of your return till December, I endeavored to bring my mind to acquiesce in the too painful situation, but I have now been in a state of hopeful expectation. I have reckoned the days since Bass went away 100 times over, and every letter expected to find the day set for your return. But now I fear it is far distant. I have frequently been told that the communication would be cut off and that you would not be ever able to return. Sometimes I have been told so by those who really wished it might be so, with malicious pleasure. Sometimes your timid folks have apprehended that it would be so. I wish anything would bring you nearer. If there is really any danger, I should think you would remove. 'Tis a plan your enemies would rejoice to see accomplished, and will effect if it lies in their power. I am not apt to be intimidated, you know. I have given as little heed to that and 1,000 other bugbear reports as possible. I have slept as soundly since my return, notwithstanding all the ghosts and hobgoblins, as ever I did in my life. 'Tis true, I never close my eyes at night till I have been to Philadelphia, and my first visit in the morning is there. I think what's most just frustrating and also adorable about this whole exchange is that Abigail writes, I really would love some tea. John writes, I don't remember you asking for tea. She says, remember the tea that I asked for. And he says, I've already sent you some tea. Then, he says, oh no, the tea went to the wrong person. And she says, oh no, the tea came to the wrong person. It's very farcical almost. I mean, you could not...
A farce. It's the perfect way to describe it.
You couldn't write a better, I Love Lucy episode of missed messages and cross purposes and each person telling the other the exact same thing in letters written 2 days apart. Mm-hmm. The hilarity of it and in the moment, it must have just been incredibly she's already dealing with her own illness from the inoculation, her children's illness, both from inoculation and catching it naturally. And all of those, people crammed into that house, and she just wants some tea. And then she goes to her cousin-in-law's house to socialize and hang out and get a little bit of time away from all of that bustle and noise and craziness. And she's given the tea she was supposed to get. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, your sweetheart brought it. How nice for you. You can just imagine her saying, well, bless your heart.
And poor Mrs. Samuel Adams, completely oblivious.
What a nice surprise.
So nice of Samuel. He never sends me nice things.
Anyway, so this particular little, episode is so domestic and so charming and so delightful to me. And throughout all of this, we haven't been reading the entirety of all of these letters. We really wanted to kind of pull out this little episode and have the conversation between them happen in chronological order. But throughout, they're talking about the movements of troops, and she's talking about if it's really getting too dangerous for you, you will have to leave Philadelphia. And she's telling him about the state of their house in Boston and how she was able to get over there and check on it and air it out, and all of these things happening. Meanwhile, this one little thread running through this, section of letters between them, which goes July to September. That's 3 months, 2.5 months or so, of just each catching the other in this, don't forget the herbs. I've sent the herbs.
Yeah.
It happens in such clear, one stacked on top of the other of, missed communication. It is really illustrative of how hard it was to do anything within a clear time frame, or to know what another person was going to be receiving, or when they were going to be receiving it, or how you could the thought of having to wait 2 weeks to get a response to something when we can now today instantly communicate with each other. And people get so impatient when someone doesn't immediately text you back.
Right. Yeah.
What's going on? Why haven't they written back? Why are they ignoring me? Is it something I said? And we go into this spiral of
Right. And here she is waiting weeks.
And so this was just, I love this little moment in these big things that are happening with the army and the, different cities being under siege and then being released from siege, and the army moving into other places, and John thinking about going to New York, and
smallpox
and smallpox on top of everything.
The house is a disaster, and the kids
Meanwhile,
are sick, and
we've established a country.
right.
We think we're busy these days.
Right.
They've literally declared independence, which is amounting to a declaration of war that is already happening, that is already underway. And they're trying to, figure out what the next movement of the British Army is going to be. Meanwhile, they can't manage to get a canister of tea to the right person between cities.
Yep. It's fascinating.
It's just so charming, and I love it. And I think this is one of those stories that doesn't really get talked about very much. It's kind of, the main focus of the John and Abigail, relationship is the wartime letters, and then their time in England and France, and sort of, but these little moments, I love giving them airtime because it's just so human and it's so marital. It is so much it's so emblematic of a relationship of these two people who, they're separated for months on end. he's just trying to do something nice for her and it goes upside down.
Yep.
So there are several sort of linguistic pronunciation moments in the course of all of these letters that Christopher will also be elucidating. And then our episode here in the Abigail Adams Birthplace in Weymouth, we are so grateful to the Abigail Adams Historical Society for giving us access to this place, this beautiful building that saw so much of John and Abigail's early years together. And we really have been so delighted to be able to use this space for this episode.
It's so surreal to be sitting here in the room where they courted each other.
Yes, the room where it happened, surrounded by, the walls, the furniture, the furniture, as we've been informed, the furniture is not necessarily original to the home, but
that's why we get to sit in it.
Exactly. We get to just plop down on these chairs and couches and everything, but it is evocative of what would have been in these rooms. And I will share in the links to the podcast, I'll share some photographs and, so you can get a sense of the atmosphere that we've been able to record in today. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pass it off to Christopher for our linguistic elements.
Thank you, Sarah. Indeed, it was a great experience to be able to record in that home. I'm here, unfortunately, having to record the linguistic section a little bit later on by myself, as we were constrained with the time that we were able to spend in the Abigail Adams home. But there's a lot of things I want to talk about that we encountered in the letters that we read today. And starting off in Abigail's letter from July 14th, her spelling of Canada stood out to us. She spells it Canady. And this triggered a few alarm bells in my head, as I've seen a lot of similar things with this, particularly with regard to words that have an ending. In linguistics, this whole group of words are called the comma set. Comma, they all end in that sound. And there's been a lot of uncertainty in how to spell that over the years, because that sound, it's a neutral central vowel. There's a phonetic symbol for it called a schwa, but there's no one letter that represents that sound in the English language, or really in any other language that I'm aware of. And so there's often a lot of confusion as to how to spell that sound, because it can be spelled with almost, I think pretty much every vowel can ultimately be used to spell that sound in various circumstances, in English at least. And so there's always a question of is someone actually using that central vowel, or is it something close to it? And then when they're writing it, are they unsure exactly what letter they should be using to spell something? So it's a really fascinating question. And her spelling of Canada with a Y at the end really raises some questions of, is this a clue to how she was saying it? Was she saying Canady? Those Y endings usually indicate something like Canady or Canada, which is maybe a possibility, but doesn't seem like the most likely thing to me. What I've seen in other situations, I've seen, for example, the word America has been rhymed with words that end in A, pray, day, in a lot of poetry from the time. So there's maybe something going on between that A sound and that sound. But what exactly is going on? Another instance I've seen in a personal diary of another person from this time period, he actually spelled Canada, or Canada. He spelled it D-A-Y at the end, day. Now, we learned in our last episode that A sound was not a diphthong like it is today. It was a monophthong. De, pre, se. That was a long monophthong. So assuming that that's still true for Abigail, as we talked about last time, is she maybe doing something to indicate that with Canada? Canada. So what I kind of settled on is something that I've actually encountered in modern day New England accents, that neutral resting sound sits maybe a little bit higher and more forward than just maybe a little bit towards Canada. And then if you're not really saying but it's almost more of an Canada, it's starting to get close to that A, or even close to that sound, Canada. And so then there's some uncertainty as to how you would spell that. Do you spell that with something indicating an A spelling, A, like AY, or is it something maybe closer to that sound? So maybe that's why she just uses the I here. In this letter, though, we chose to go with something leaning a bit more towards Canada, keeping that vowel mid-close, closer to where that A sound would be, Canada. So that was a fun one to encounter and definitely raises some interesting questions. Another fun one we encountered that we were debating on whether or not to use, but I made us do it because it's fascinating for the time period, is the pronunciation of Rome, the city of Rome, as room. And this is something we see in a lot of historical contexts. Do we know whether or not Abigail pronounced it room or Rome? It's a bit uncertain. She does spell it the traditional way, but there is a lot of historical precedent for it being pronounced room. And this actually makes a lot of sense historically. Back in Middle English, that O sound, Rome, eventually moved up into the oo position during the Great Vowel Shift. That's why a lot of words that are spelled with a double O, that double O, like in fool, used to represent the long O sound, foal. But those during the course of the Great Vowel Shift, those double O words shifted from the O sound up into the oo sound. And so, but Rome is not an English word. That's an Italian word, probably ultimately Latin. And so it would have originally had that O sound, but it would have also probably shifted along with all those English O sounds up into the oo position. And so then Rome ultimately became room over the course of time. But people recognized that the spelling didn't match with that, and they heard the way that Italians and other people in Europe were pronouncing it, and they were all still pronouncing it Rome. And so they realized maybe we need to change the pronunciation back to Rome and stop saying room. And it was around the end of the 18th century that this shift was starting to take place. So it's certainly plausible that Abigail might have pronounced it room instead of Rome. And so we decided to go with that option here. Another word that shows up a number of times in these letters, and of course is the focus of our story of this T, is the word herb. There's a lot of interesting things happening here with this one little tiny word. You might be tempted to go with herb or herb, which is the present-day Southern English pronunciation in England, British English. But historically, that H was dropped off. That H was added back on in British English during the 19th century because of the spelling. And so in colonial times, that H still would have been dropped, just as we do it in American English today. But there's also some fun things happening with the vowel there. That sound. That sound has gone through quite a few changes over the years. The sound that we use in words today, like nurse and word and herb, is three different sounds that all collapsed together from over the course from Middle English on into about the late 18th, early 19th century. They were still in the process of merging together. And the last holdout sound that hadn't really fully merged into that sound were ones that are spelled with ER, that are in the front of the mouth, like herb. They would have retained that short E plus R sound And in a more conservative, careful style pronunciation, probably would have been herb, or earth, and other words that fall into that category. However, a lot of people, kind of more lower middle class people, both in England and over in the colonies, were pronouncing those air sounds like ar, arb, arth. And so that was one option. But then there's a third option where they were starting to merge it in with the sound that was more centralized, where words like nurse and word and worm had already fallen into that and merged together in a more centralized vowel. We see Noah Webster in his writings in the 1780s, 1790s. He calls this out, and he says that you need to keep it forward and a bit raised in that short E position. Erb is how Noah Webster says it should be pronounced. But he acknowledges that millions, he literally uses the word millions of people in America are saying something like arb, with a more open front vowel. And then he accuses a lot of kind of well-to-do, college-educated people who are trying to avoid the so-called vulgar arb pronunciation by then shifting it towards where it merges in with the others, where you have herb. And so the modern-day variant that we use today was, according to Noah Webster, a corruption from the snobby college people who were trying to not sound vulgar, but were also failing to quite get the herb. And so there was this three-way option of how you could have pronounced these sounds at the time. And we decided to go a little bit towards the more popular, common pronunciation of the time, arb. We didn't quite go all the way for arb, and so it is started maybe drifting a little bit towards the more modern style of herb. And so Abigail maybe is hedging a little bit between the popular and the cautious, educated, don't want to sound like a country bumpkin, but maybe I'll just make this start to sound like all those other sounds option, which is probably kind of where the course of things were going at that time. But we didn't go with the more conservative style, herb, which could have been an option that we could have used for her. So yeah, that was a fun one to encounter a bunch of times in there. The next thing that I wanted to talk about that we encountered was actually some lexical items, some word usage. It's in Abigail's letter from August 18th, or I guess really the 19th, but she wrote the 18th, where she says that our little Charles, who has been very bad. And normally you would think that she's talking about his behavior would be your immediate impulse there. Of course, she then immediately in the next sentence says, the symptoms rose to a burning fever. So you realize right away that she's talking about his health. But it's interesting. Today we would say, he's been feeling bad, his health has been bad. We wouldn't say that he himself is bad. That really to us implies behavior. But she clearly here is using that to indicate his health. His health is bad by saying that he has been very bad. So that was just an interesting usage of that word that's slightly different than the way we would use it today. And then later on in that letter, she refers to her daughter Nabby, and she says, Nabby is cleverly. They are turning fast upon her, and she can walk day to day. And so it implies that Nabby is getting better. She's cleverly. And this one was very interesting because this is, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, a old regional, specific to New England usage of cleverly, not as an adverb, but as an adjective, meaning in good health or free or recovered from an illness or infirmary. And it's interesting because the very first usage of this word in this definition is from 1775 from one of the Adams letters. And then again in 1784, the Adams letters are referenced once again for the usage of this word. And then there's a couple of other usages as well. In particularly, there's from the 1860s, a dictionary of Americanisms, where it says cleverly, much used in some parts of New England instead of well or very well. For example, how do you do? I am cleverly. So up into the mid-19th century, this is still being used in New England to mean that someone is well. And so here we have Abigail Adams using this in her letter to say that Nabby she's well, she's getting better, she's recovering in this unique New England usage. I'd be curious to see if there are examples that predate the earliest 1775 instance here in the OED. I'd be willing to bet that there are likely earlier usages of it as well. So hey, if you find one of those in a letter or a journal, let me know, or let the Oxford English Dictionary know. They always love it when people can provide them with earlier examples of the examples they have recorded in their dictionary. So that was a fun one to see there. So this next one is a fun one. They're all fun, but I like this one in particular. There's a number of references throughout here to a Mr. Gary. That Mr. Gary is Elbridge Gerry, who was elected to the Second Continental Congress. He was a signer ultimately of the Declaration of Independence. He signed the Articles of Confederation. He eventually went on to be elected to the first United States Congress after the ratification of the Constitution, and he helped draft the Bill of Rights. He also was governor of Massachusetts for a time, and during his tenure as governor of Massachusetts, he approved the creation of a very strangely shaped district for the state Senate elections. The South Essex district weirdly curved all the way around a number of communities in the North Shore area, including Salisbury and Amesbury, and going all the way down around Andover and then down to Marblehead and Lynn, creating this odd shape that critics in newspapers accused of looking a bit like a salamander. And they termed this the Gerrymander, as to poke fun of Governor Gerry for his support of this district and the whole idea of creating these partisan districts to make it easier for yourself to win elections or for your party to win elections. And both this concept and the ridicule of it and the name really took off in American politics and American society. And you began to see the word spread pretty quickly throughout the 19th century when political parties were being accused of gerrymandering. Of course, we know this word today. Often we pronounce it, though, gerrymandering because of the way it's spelled. Usually when the letter G is followed by an E, it's going to be a J sound. Examples would be gender, general, generous, genius, gentle, geography. But there are a few words where we have the G sound, such as geld and get. Now, how did Elbridge Gerry pronounce his last name? It can be hard to say. According to the family and according to residents of his hometown, he pronounced his name Gary. The Massachusetts Historical Society, who has custody over the Adams letters, their guidance is to pronounce his name Gary. So we've gone along with all of these authorities on the pronunciation of his name as Gary here. But it is interesting to see how over the years the name, the practice and the word most associated with his name today is a bit obscured now because we've shifted the pronunciation to gerrymandering in a lot of instances, though there's still some debate. A lot of people insist that it should be pronounced gerrymander and gerrymandering, though I think the pronunciation gerrymandering is likely won out as being the most popular. So that's why we've pronounced his name Gary here. But yeah, it's interesting it's fun to see him pop up here in connection to this practice. This next one is pretty straightforward, but one that I really like to point out as well. It's the pronunciation of the word yes. In most modern accents, that's going to have the short E sound, eh. or whatever the equivalent in someone's accent might be, but it's generally going to fall in with all of those words that have that sound, that short e sound, like dress and get and bet. However, the contemporary resources in the late 18th century are all very consistent in putting this in with all the groups of words that have the short I sound, like kit or sit or big, having it pronounced more yis. And also, just from analyzing those sources as well, it seems to me pretty clear that that short I sound was maybe a bit more tense than I have it in my accent, than I hear in a lot of people, at least in American accents and British accents that I hear as well, tend to have it a little more centralized, big, big, whereas I get the sense that it was a bit more tense in the 18th century, more like big, big. So instead of yes, it'd be more like yes, would be my interpretation of it, yes. And this would also apply with a word like yesterday in the 18th century. So we've gone with that pronunciation here as well. The last feature that I wanted to point out is Abigail's spelling of the word hobgoblin, where she spells it with an ing ending, hobgoblings, which is interesting because etymologically there's never been a G at the end of this word. It comes ultimately from ancient Greek, through Latin, through French eventually. The suffix from Old French potentially being in, or possibly even from classical Latin, inus, ine. It's always been associated with an N at the ending. There's never been a G or that ing ending. So what's going on here? Well, something pretty cool, actually. That ing ending is, it's representative of a sound in English that's very common, but we don't actually have a letter for, that sound. It's a nasal sound. It's made by placing your tongue in the same position you would for a k or a g sound up on your soft palate, but then completely closing off the passage of air through the mouth and allowing the air to come out through your nose, making it a nasal sound. Now, not having a letter for this, the practice throughout the centuries has been to use the combination ng to represent this sound. And that's what we have at these ing endings, though there is some evidence that at some point there was a g pronounced at the end, ing. But certainly by the late 18th century, that g sound has fallen away. That was lost in sort of the late middle, early modern period. And just the sound was preserved. But what happens in a lot of accents, and you actually probably do it in your accent, I know I do it in mine, when pronouncing a word that ends in ing, we tend to move the placement of the tongue from the soft palate up to the alveolar ridge, that little gum ridge right behind your front teeth on the top, that's where the letter N is articulated. So running, instead of running, running. And oftentimes we don't actually really notice this unless the vowel changes to a shorter I sound, runnin'. If I keep the vowel at a long E sound, running, I'm running, people don't tend to notice it. But if I change the vowel to that short I sound, runnin', I'm running, suddenly that like triggers alarm bells in people's brains nowadays. They're like, oh, this is an unsophisticated, uncouth, vulgar accent. They're dropping their G's. Obviously, there's no G being dropped there other than in the writing, where I did it right there, writing. You didn't even notice. This was actually something that's been very common in English, this shifting of the to the and it's not held a lot of social stigma. All throughout the early modern period, this was common through the 17th and 18th century. This was a common practice for people to shift that to an on these ing endings, or what we might call today dropping the G. But there wasn't a lot of social stigma attached to it, so people didn't really care if you did it. Unlike today, where there tends to be a lot of social stigma attached to whether or not you're pronouncing or in or n, or however you might be, running, runnin. So in the late 18th century, Abigail Adams is writing this. It's very likely that she did this a lot in her speech, and the people around her probably did it a lot, what we might call G-dropping. But then what that does is it can leave a little bit of confusion as to how to how to spell words that end in ing or just in. For example, goblin. Goblin. Is it gobbling? Goblin? If you're pronouncing it goblin, well, I don't know, that could be an ing ending if you're not exactly sure how it's spelled. And so she, in her uncertainty of how to spell this word in the moment, wrote ing for the ending of hobgoblin. Hobgoblings. I doubt she was pronouncing it hobgoblings, but she probably pronounced it hobgoblin. But this does give us a clue that in other words where she has an ing ending, that she might shift the articulation of that final consonant from the soft palate to the alveolar ridge, running, writing, visiting. And so that's something that we explore throughout in her writings based off of evidences like this. Before I close, though, I did want to end with a cool etymology that I discovered with the word hobgoblin. The word hob is an old, very old, rhyming nickname for Robert. It rhymes with Rob, and so Hob was used as a nickname for Robert or Robin as well, because Hob rhymes with Rob. And so then this suddenly makes a lot of sense why Robin Goodfellow in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream is named Robin Goodfellow, because he is a little goblin character. He's a mischievous fairy. And Hobgoblin, Hob would have been a nickname. So one of Robin Goodfellow's nicknames would have been Hob, which is also a name then associated with hobgoblins. So I thought that was really cool. And that's a wrap on our language section of these letters from John and Abigail.